StevePavlina.com, Personal Development for Smart People, podcast number 4 for Friday, October 7th, 2005. Today's podcast, I have a special treat for you. This is a recording of a live mini-seminar that I presented earlier this week. And the title is Using Patterns for Personal Development. It's a presentation about the subconscious behavior patterns that control your thinking and thereby control your results in life. And the goal of this mini-seminar is to teach you to become aware of these patterns, which are operating in your life right now, and then to enable you to take conscious control over them, so you can align your subconscious behavior and thinking patterns to be congruent with your conscious goals. Now, at a few points during the recording, you'll hear mention of a handout, and I've included the complete text of that handout as part of the blog post which accompanies this podcast. So you'll have access to the same material the original audience had. So please enjoy Using Patterns for Personal Development. How many people here have a goal for themselves? Quite a few. Would anyone be willing to share their goal? Just one goal that you might have. John?
Increase traffic to my website.
Increase traffic to your website. Great. Now, how would you go about achieving this goal? Well, there are many ways to achieve goals. People have already written zillions of books on these topics. One method, the trial and error approach. Just fail your way forward and hopefully you'll eventually get there. I'm sure some of us have tried applying that one. Another method, the cause and effect approach. This is a method often espoused by speakers such as Brian Tracy, where you say your goal is an effect to be achieved, and all you have to do is create the cause that will achieve that effect. Does that make sense? So what you are trying to do in that case is create a plan of action to reach your goal, and then you simply implement the plan step by step by step until you get there, adjusting your approach as needed. A third method to achieve goals is what I call the intention manifestation approach. Some of you might be familiar with this. In this approach to achieving your goals, it's all about getting yourself to believe that you can achieve it. The idea of think and grow rich. So a writer in this area might be someone like Napoleon Hill or Dr. Wayne Dyer. You have to see it first through things such as visualization, seeing your goal in your mind, and then when you believe it enough, you will eventually achieve it. It will manifest for you. Sometimes through a process of direct action, sometimes through a process of subconscious action. You're not even necessarily aware of how the goal is being manifest. Sometimes through a process you might call synchronicity, where events seem to happen in the world that reinforce your goal. For the purpose of this little mini seminar we're doing, though, the process by which you achieve your goal doesn't matter so much as the fact that all these methods of achieving your goal all have something in common. They all start with a thought or an idea, and they all take you forward through a series of steps and end with a result. Does this make sense? So no matter how you want to achieve your goal, it requires having an idea and somehow carrying that forward and ending up in some sort of result state. So for example, the goal John mentioned of building traffic to his website. He's at a certain point right now, he has this idea, he wants to have more traffic to his website. Some process has to occur, and he's at that end state. In this case, we're talking about going through this process consciously. The problem, however, is that these processes also run unconsciously. They run in such ways that we're not even aware of it. Right now in our lives, we have many examples of these processes going on where we have thoughts that are somehow creating results in our lives, and we don't even know how they're happening. And most of the time, when we try to set a goal and move towards it, we get blocked in some way. Something knocks us off course. It's not just a smooth path from A to B. And one of the reasons that happens is that we have subconscious goals and patterns and thoughts going on that are knocking us off course, that are in conflict with the goal we consciously want to achieve. And what I call these are patterns. So we have these patterns subconsciously running in our lives, and we may have many, many more of these subconscious patterns than we have conscious goals. And they're constantly knocking us off course. So in this little mini seminar, what we're going to do is go through a process of how to identify these patterns that are going through your life, how to uproot them, and replace them with patterns that are going to support us on the path to our goal. So the first thing I want to do is identify 3 primary patterns, and you have these on your handout. And these 3 patterns in which these subconscious processes take place are the chain, the loop, and the spiral. And we'll go over each one of these right now. A chain pattern you might think of as a stimulus response. Some trigger happens, either an environmental trigger external to us or an internal trigger, such as a feeling. It causes us to have a certain thought, and that thought eventually triggers a chain of events that produces a result. And that's where the chain ends. So for example, let's say a friend of yours comes back from Hawaii, and they tell you what a great time they had in Hawaii. They loved it, they had a great time, there was a wonderful vacation. That's an external stimulus. That triggers you to have a thought. Wow, I could really use a vacation myself. So you think that thought then may lead to a chain of events, could lead to maybe some synchronicities happening. You get a flyer in the mail for a travel agency that's having a special on a trip to Hawaii. Maybe it's you decide and make this detailed plan of action to get yourself to go to Hawaii, but somehow you end up taking that vacation to Hawaii, and then you return from your trip, and that's where the chain ends. Another way this could happen is it's simply an internally triggered chain. You just have this feeling of being run down, and you think, I could really use a vacation right now. And that gets you thinking, maybe I should actually take a vacation. And soon you have this chain of events that leads you to take the vacation, you get the result. A very simple stimulus response pattern. I'm sure we've all seen this happen in our lives. Now, how many times does this happen subconsciously, where you're not even aware of it? This is what advertising is all about, to program these subconscious stimulus response events. So that you see a commercial, you see a billboard, and suddenly you're going out to eat at a restaurant, or going to one of the casinos nearby, and you're not even sure why you're doing it, because you never actually consciously set that as a goal to do it. You just find yourself exhibiting and running these patterns. The second type of pattern is the loop. This is where you have a chain that is going back around and beginning the chain again. So you have a loop in your behavior. Another word for this is a habit or an addiction. So we see these patterns where you have a thought, it causes you to take an action, you get a result. That result then triggers the same original thought then that causes you to take that same action, and so on, and you keep repeating in the loop. So you not only, in this case, get what you expect, you also expect what you get. You expect it to continue. So an example of a loop is watching your favorite TV show. You watch an episode of your favorite TV show, the result is you like it, triggers the thought to consider watching it again. Next week you're watching the same show again. You like it again, you decide to watch it again, and so on, and it keeps repeating. And then you watch a whole season of shows. Often, these loops are just looping unconsciously, and you're not even aware of the pattern that you're going through. And loops are everywhere. A great deal of our lives are run by loops right now. Think about it. You go to work each day, just looping through the same pattern of thinking and behavior. You eat your favorite foods. You shop at the same places. You come to these meetings every week. It's just this pattern of looping behavior, and you're not even aware of actually making the conscious decision. Usually you make a conscious decision at one point to start the loop, and then suddenly you're on autopilot, and you just keep going and going and going. And the loop doesn't end until something happens, often some kind of external event that happens that knocks you out of that pattern, knocks you out of the loop. Let's move on to the third pattern now. The third pattern is the spiral. The spiral is what you get when a loop pattern becomes unstable. In the case of a loop, the response is re-triggering the stimulus, but to the exact same degree. So you just keep watching your favorite TV show each week. You keep going to work, but it's not changing. The pattern is just reinforcing itself as it is. With a spiral, though, every pass through that loop changes in intensity. It's either weakening in intensity with each pass, or it's strengthening in intensity with each pass. And you can also have positive spirals, which seem to be giving you some type of benefit, or you can have negative spirals, which seem to be doing you some type of harm. So you have really 4 types of spirals, and these are listed on your handouts too. You have the positive and negative matched with whether it's a mild change in intensity each time through the cycle, or it's an intense change in intensity through the cycle. So let's go through these 4 types with an example of a relationship. So let's say you're in a relationship with somebody, and you're noticing a spiral pattern in the behavior of your relationship. If you have a positive, and another name for positive is an upward spiral. If you have a positive mild spiral when you're in a relationship, your relationship is getting better and better, but very, very gradually. It's So this might be, the result you might see would be you have a very long engagement period. You fall in love, you have, say, a 4-year engagement period. You're spiraling upwards, but very, very gradually. You might also have a positive intense cycle. And with all the wedding chapels here in Vegas, we see this one quite a bit, don't we? So a positive intense cycle, what would that be? Instead of a 4-year engagement, you meet, you fall in love, 4 weeks later you're married. You can also have a negative spiral. Another name for a negative spiral is a downward spiral. What would be an example of a negative mild spiral in a relationship? A slow decline towards breakup over a period of years. The relationship gradually getting worse and worse. What would be a negative but intense downward spiral? Where after a short period of time, it's like, get out of my house, I hate you. And then probably a very messy divorce. So these different types of spirals, you have positive mild, positive intense, negative mild, negative intense. These are patterns we run in our lives all the time. But spirals, unlike loops, are unstable by their very nature. At some point, they're going to break. As the intensity increases, eventually the spiral destroys itself. Or as the intensity decreases, the spiral eventually fizzles out. So you see a relationship that either ends with a lot of negative energy, gets closer with a lot of positive energy, fizzles one way or the other too. So you can have a relationship that's fizzling in the negative area, or fizzling in the positive area in the sense that it's getting better but very, very slowly, and it sort of tapers off and plateaus. Does this make sense? Why worry about these patterns? Why consider these patterns? Because they're running in your lives right now. They're controlling your behavior. They're controlling your results. And worst of all, they're interfering in your conscious goals, in your path to your conscious goals. You're trying to move from A to B, and these patterns, these feedback loops, these spirals are pulling you right back where you started, or maybe knocking you off course entirely. So our goal for this little mini seminar is to figure out how to change these patterns. Now that you're aware of these patterns, you can start to look for them in your life. But how do we actually change them? Well, every pattern, every one of these patterns has a vulnerability. Even though they're running subconsciously, once we become aware of them, we can change them. We can literally destroy them. Because all of these patterns rely on stimulus, thought, and result. And then in the case of loops or spirals, the result is the stimulus once again. So you have a chain pattern where it's a stimulus, a stimulus, a thought, a result. In the loop pattern, you get a stimulus, a stimulus, a thought, a result, which then becomes another stimulus to the same thought, to the same result, and back again. And the spiral pattern is very similar to the loop pattern, except the intensity is changing each time through the cycle. But the vulnerabilities are at those 3 points. At the point of the stimulus, at the point of the thought, or at the point of the result. So the way to break the pattern is to attack one of those 3 points, to actually break it. How would you break the stimulus? As an example, and this may be somewhat severe, if you're in a pattern you don't want to be in, such as a chain pattern, the way you would, let's say you're in a relationship and your spouse is constantly pushing your buttons and they're making you angry. Well, one way to break the stimulus is to dump the person. No more stimulus. You literally get rid of the stimulus. You prevent the stimulus from occurring at all. Another example, if the smell of donuts turns you into Homer Simpson and you're like, I gotta have a donut. What do? Prevent donuts from appearing anywhere in your reality. Don't allow donuts into your house. Don't allow donuts into your workplace. Just keep donuts away from me. And you see people trying this approach to break addictions, for example. Just keep that away from me. I don't want to see it. How would you break the thought? Let's say you can't break the stimulus. Now you're working on the thought. The stimulus has occurred. But now you have to prevent it from creating the thought that's going to lead you forward in that chain, or in that loop, or in that spiral. As an example, one of my favorite examples of how to break this pattern is there was a Las Vegas pit boss I read about years ago, and he wanted to quit smoking, but he tried everything and just couldn't quit smoking. Because everything in his environment was reinforcing the pattern of smoking. So here's what he did. He took out a billboard near the strip, put his picture on it, really large picture of him, and the caption read, "If you see me smoking, I'll pay you $100,000. Now what did that do? Did that change the stimulus to start smoking? No, he still had the craving to start smoking. But what it did do is it changed the thought. Because now instead of thinking, I'm going to go have a cigarette, he's thinking, if I have a cigarette and somebody sees me, I'm out $100,000. Change the thought. And that thought breaks the pattern. Now he's not going to go smoke. Now he's not going to proceed forward to that result. Does this make sense? So that's one way of breaking the thought. Another way to break the thought, promise other people that you're going to do something. Promise other people that you're going to make the change. Now, if you don't make the change, and you'd have a tendency to procrastinate, instead of thinking, oh, I don't really care, I don't really need to do it, I can just be lazy. Now instead you're thinking, well, if I'm lazy, I'm going to disappoint a lot of people, and then I'm going to be embarrassed. So there's another way to do it. Promise other people. It will break the thought, so that now you've changed the thought, you've morphed it, you've introduced another side thought. It's not the same thought anymore. So it's not going to continue the same pattern. And the third place to break the pattern is to break the result itself. Let's say you have a chocolate addiction. And so you think about having chocolate. Oh, chocolate, I love chocolate. And pretty soon you're eating some chocolate. And you have chocolate in your house, of course. And so you think about chocolate, you eat chocolate. It tastes good, feels good. Then you later on think about having more chocolate, and so on. So you're in this cycle, this looping pattern. One way to break the result is to buy chocolate you don't like. Fill your house with chocolate that doesn't taste good to you. Maybe some kind of unsweetened chocolate. So then every time you have this thought to eat chocolate, you eat chocolate that tastes bad. So you've broken the result. The result is no longer pleasurable. Does this make sense? There are many ways to break these patterns. And just to make this more clear, we're going to go through an example. So I'm going to have you help me, and we're going to go through an example together. So here's our problem. Let's say Maureen has this problem where she's constantly overspending on credit cards because she just loves clothes and she just wants to keep buying more high-priced clothes. And she's deeply in debt and she's sinking further into debt. And she wants to break that pattern of behavior. It's a subconscious cycle she keeps running through. She's not even consciously deciding to do that, but this pattern keeps running in her life. And it's a downward spiral that may eventually lead to bankruptcy. So we have to save Maureen from this. So how are we going to do it? Well, we have three ways we can break it. We can break the stimulus, we can break the thought, or we can break the result. So let's start with the stimulus. The stimulus is that she's out shopping and she sees these new clothes, these new expensive clothes that she just has to have. How could we break the stimulus? How could we break that stimulus? Anyone?
Don't take her shopping.
Don't take her shopping. Exactly. Don't go to the store. Stay away. Keep it away. Prevent that stimulus from ever happening. Okay, what about the thought? The thought is that she's having when she sees it. So now we've already had the stimulus happen. She's there in the store and she sees the clothes and she thinks, I want that and I'm going to buy it now. How could we actually break that thought? Anyone?
Promise her new husband, John, that she won't ever shop again for high-priced clothes, or use the credit cards to do that.
Mm-hmm. Make a promise to somebody else. So now if she breaks it, she's thinking, oh, guilt, 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 if I do this. Another way to do that would be, say, wear a rubber band, and you tweak it. So you cause yourself a little bit of pain each time you do it. Now lastly, we have the result. The result is, she pulls out her credit card and buys the clothes. How could we break the result of being... George?
Cut away the credit card.
Cut up the credit card.
Or buy ugly clothes.
Or buy ugly clothes, exactly. So you break the result. It's not as rewarding anymore. Or take your credit card balance to your credit card. So you're looking at it when you pull out the card. There's another milder way. Wouldn't stop. Give me your credit card. So the idea of breaking these patterns we can break the stimulus, we can break the thought, we can break the result. But ideally, let's try breaking all three together. Because patterns tend to be very strongly established. And most people honestly use too little energy when trying to break these patterns. Sometimes you might try to attack just the stimulus and it doesn't quite work. Your solution just sort of fizzles. Or you might try just attacking the thought or just the result and it's not quite enough. So we have this military analogy of overwhelming force. We don't want to just change these patterns. We want to destroy them. We want to annihilate them. We want to just knock them out of existence. So we advance on all three fronts simultaneously. We break the stimulus, we break the thought, and we break the result. So in the credit card example, we would do all of those things together at the same time. Now, even if two of them fail, if the third one works, the pattern is broken. The pattern will not continue. So we just increase our odds of success. Now, once we've broken that pattern, we need to condition a new pattern. Why? Well, for one reason, patterns exist because they fill a need. So for example, if you have a pattern of smoking, maybe the need it's filling is that it relaxes you. And that's a good need to have filled, and if we eliminate that pattern, now we have this void, and a new pattern is going to be conditioned to take its place. And if we don't fill it consciously, somebody else is going to do it for us. Advertising, society, our family, the people we're with, our work environment, something will just be conditioned into us automatically because we have a need that has to be filled. There's a void there. So to condition a new pattern, you basically go through the exact same process. You set up, except now you're doing it positively instead of negatively. You set up a stimulus, you set up a thought, and you set up a result that perhaps you want it to loop, you want it to spiral, or you just want it to be a chain event where it's triggered by something. But now you're the one who can decide how to do this. Let me take you through a personal example of how I had to do this to make a big change in my life, of how I went through this process of breaking the old stimulus, thought, result pattern and conditioning in a new stimulus, thought, result pattern. And that was last year when I decided I wanted to make a change in my career. I wanted to stop working in the computer game industry, and I wanted to move over to working on writing and speaking in the field of personal development. So of course, what did I do first? I set a goal to do it. I made a plan of action. And I also focused on the intention manifestation process. I started visualizing what I wanted. And you know what happened? Months later, nothing! I was still working on games. I was still developing games. Why? Because at the same time I was working on those things consciously, still the bulk of my thoughts were those old chains and loops and spirals that I'd established over the past decade of working in the game industry. They were very strong patterns. The pattern of how I spent my time, the people I associated with, the thoughts that went through my head, the type of projects I decided to work on, the way I viewed reality, all of this stuff was simply reinforcing the old identity. And so as soon as I started making a few steps forward, those old patterns would start circulating even more strongly, and I was sucked right back to the old way again. So after a few months of that, I realized working on this goal directly is not going to work. I'm not getting anywhere. So what I did is, instead of attacking the problem itself, I attacked the resistance to the problem. In other words, I attacked those chains and those loops and those spirals that were keeping me where I was. So for example, some specific things I did were I went through my home office and I took all the game programming books off my bookshelf and I stuffed them in the garage, and I replaced them with books on personal development and books on speaking and books on writing. And if I didn't have enough books for it, which I didn't, I just left an empty bookshelf to make room for those to come in. I stopped reading books on game development. I stopped going to game development seminars. I started going to speaker seminars and speaking workshops. I stopped accepting invitations to speak at game development events. I changed my computer desktop. I run Microsoft Windows, so I changed the desktop where all the icons were set to run game development software. I deleted all those and I replaced them with icons to run like text editors and things I would use for speaking. So now, whenever I looked at my Windows desktop, it was no longer a stimulus to work on games. In my web browser, I deleted all the bookmarks that I had, or all the favorites I had for game development websites. They were all gone, and I replaced them all with links to websites on personal development and speaking. So every time I ran my web browser, now it was a stimulus for a different line of thinking, therefore a different result. I quit my membership in trade associations. I quit my membership in the Association of Shareware Professionals. I quit my membership in the International Game Developers Association. I joined Toastmasters and started coming to Toastmasters meetings. I had a shelf with some gaming industry awards. I cleared it off and put all those in the closet, took them out of view, and made space for speaking awards. And now I've got a shelf full of a few speaking trophies from speech contests. What does that do? It reinforces my identity as a speaker instead of as a game developer. I was running a popular game discussion forum on my website. I turned the whole thing over to someone else for free so that they could run it on their website. So now I no longer had to support it. I was the administrator of that site. I stopped hanging out with game developers. And I started hanging out with people who were doing speaking or writing or somehow working in the field of personal development. I changed the people I associated with. In fact, shortly before this, I moved from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And when I came here, instead of building relationships in the game development community, I built relationships in Toastmasters and with other people working on writing or speaking or personal development. Are you seeing where this is going? It's how I just completely altered my environment to destroy all those old patterns, just wipe them out one by one. I also told people I was making this change. I discussed it with my wife. I got her on board. I got her to commit to it and agree to it. And I said, stop thinking of me as a game developer. Don't even mention games at all. Forget it. Don't talk to me about games. I don't want to know anything about it. I said, talk to me only about personal development or writing or speaking. And she was okay with that. She agreed. I set aside time each day for writing. I launched a new personal development website. So here I'm starting a new pattern. And all I had was just a few pages and one article. That was it. But it created a new stimulus to start working on, to have a new line of thinking and new results. And what all this did is it changed the soil that I was planting my seeds in. So that now, when I started doing the cause and effect approach and the intention manifestation approach to reach my goals, now I barely even needed to do that. Because what happened was, everything around me was already supporting me going in that direction. It was pushing me forward. It was just kind of an automatic process. And that's where I am right now. It's just pushing me forward. I don't really feel like I have to exhibit that much conscious effort. All the loops and the spiral patterns I've set up and the chain patterns are just pushing me in that direction. So it's this idea of overwhelming force. If you want to make a change in your life, especially a big change, people usually put too little energy into that. And the thing is that overwhelming force in the long run takes a lot less energy, because you have to exert all this energy up front, but just for a brief burst, maybe a 30-day period. After that, all the patterns are established, and now you're coasting. People say, go with the flow. And that's exactly what you should do. However, maybe you don't like where the flow is going. And if you don't like where the flow is going, you don't have to go with the flow. But at the same time, you shouldn't fight the flow. What you should do is divert the flow. Change the flow where you want it to go. Then you flow with it, and it takes you right to your goals that you want to achieve. So there's really a 4-step process we've covered to change your patterns to be congruent with your goals. And this is also on the front page of your handout right at the bottom. Number 1, identify your goal, what it is you want to achieve. Secondly, diagnose the patterns that are working against you. What trigger patterns what chain patterns do we have? What loop patterns do we have? What spiral patterns do we have? List them out. Identify what they are. Note where you have the stimulus, the thought, and the result. Then design a new set of patterns that will support your goal. What are the new patterns you want to create? And this is just where you brainstorm. You use your own imagination. Use your creativity. What patterns will make it easy for you to achieve your goal? For example, if you want to become an expert in some particular field, you can establish the pattern of reading for an hour a day in that field. And this was a pattern I established 12 years ago. A very simple pattern. Read an hour a day on personal development. But 12 years later, it means having read 600 books. So you can see one little change having a huge result over a long period of time. This is what people tell you to do in terms of investment. Start in your 20s, invest $100 a month, and by the time you retire, you're a millionaire. Just creating that one little loop pattern, just $100 a month, every month, $100, $100, $100, and then it just carries you forward and you're there. That's going with the flow, but that's also creating the flow that you want to achieve. See, patterns, the reason to use them is that they put your results on autopilot. And these little patterns can produce tremendous long-term results. So my challenge to you tonight is to think of a change you want to make in your own life, a goal you want to achieve. Think about what patterns are holding you back. Figure out whether they're chains, they're loops, or they're spiral patterns. Create a plan to neutralize them, a plan that's going to use overwhelming force, to attack them on all 3 fronts, to attack the stimulus, to attack the thought, and to attack the result, all simultaneously. Implement that plan and stick with it just for 30 days. Because if you can last for 30 days, just that one burst of energy, you'll find that the old patterns have been destroyed and the new patterns have been established. And it's been said that creating a new habit takes 21 days. I say 30 just to push you over the edge. Give it a little more overwhelming force just to make sure you get there, to make sure you don't slip back. 30 days also has sort of a natural rhythm to it. It's 1 month, so you might start at the beginning of the month. By the end of the month, you're done. And since we're just at the beginning of a month right now, this would be a great time to start. And then all you have to do to achieve your goal is to go with the flow. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this little mini seminar. So until next time, live consciously.